Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of On Board with SoundTraxx, the SoundTraxx video series showing you how to install, configure, and set up DCC decoders and DCC sound decoders produced by SoundTraxx. In today's video, we're going to show you how to install one of our Econami ECO-200 for diesel locomotives in this Athearn RTR, or ready-to-roll series locomotive, equipped with a quick plug 9-pin JST connector for ease of installation. You'll also note that this box notes that it's DCC ready as well as sound ready, meaning that we have an enclosure already built into this model for a speaker. We're going to show you the products that you need from SoundTraxx. We're going to go over the tools that you need to complete the installation successfully, and we're going to show you how to test the installation once you've finished it. Once we have all that done, we'll go over a quick little configuration with the locomotive, and we'll show you some other features associated with the ECO-200 decoder. So stay tuned, and we're going to show you the products that we need next. So to successfully complete this installation of an ECO-200 decoder within an Athearn RTR ready-to-roll series model, you'll need a few products from SoundTraxx. The first of which is the decoder itself, and that's our Econami ECO-200 decoder for diesel locomotives here. And you'll see that this decoder is equipped with two wire harnesses on it. One, a 9-pin JST type connection that will plug right into this locomotive, the motherboard in the RTR models, and the other one that will solder to the speakers on the model. Now, talking about speakers, you'll also need one of our SoundTraxx 35 by 16 millimeter speakers that you'll install within the factory installed enclosure in the model. And lastly, in order to seal everything off on the model and seal the speaker well in that housing, we recommend that you need to use a 35 by 16 millimeter speaker gasket. And this gasket will help you secure the speaker within the enclosure and provide the best quality sound. So now that we've talked about the products we need from SoundTraxx, let's go over some of the tools that are required for this installation. You're going to want to have a Phillips head screwdriver handy to remove the coupler screws that hold the shell to the chassis of the locomotive. You'll also want a flathead screwdriver handy for manipulating any wires or parts around in the model, as it makes it a much easier job to do so with that screwdriver. You'd like to have an X-Acto knife or a hobby knife handy with a fresh blade on it, and we'll use this to remove some of the insulation from the decoder and plug it into that 9-pin harness. Now we'll also require a pair of tweezers. This happens to be a very fine pair of tweezers, and it has a spring jaw on it to help move the wiring around during the installation process. And lastly, we're going to need a pair of wire strippers and cutters to trim back some of the purple wire to solder to the speaker. Now, talking about soldering, we'll also need a soldering iron. This soldering station happens to be temperature controlled, as well as some solder and some no-clean electronics safe flux. Now, we want to make sure we're using electronics safe flux and rosin-based flux, or this no-clean type flux. We don't want to be using a plumber's flux on any of our installations, as that contains some amount of acid and could damage the installation. Now, once we have everything installed, we'll use some Kapton tape to secure the decoder, the wires, and the speaker in place. So now that we've shown you the supplies and tools needed for this installation, let's actually get right into it. You'll see just how easy of a process this is. Now, with the locomotive removed from the box, we want to go ahead and carefully begin the process of removing the shell from the frame component of the locomotive. Now you'll see we have a piece of foam here, and we're also using a generic baking tray and a piece of paper, just as we talked about in our last 21-pin NEM install video. This helps protect the model by adding some foam cushioning and keeps all the screws and loose pieces, such as the couplers and cover boxes, within one contained area on your workbench. Let's turn the locomotive over, and we're going to go ahead and grab our Phillips head screwdriver and remove the two screws that are holding the coupler boxes in place. We'll start with the front one here, and we'll loosen that one up, and we'll move to the rear one and do the same. So once you get these out, the shell can be easily removed. We'll set the rear coupler aside for safekeeping, grab the locomotive by the fuel tank here, tip it over, and grab the shell by the top portion of the dynamic brakes. Now, note that you have wires connecting the shell, lighting in the shell, to the PC board. So we want to be very careful to not remove any of those wires or pull any of the bulbs out of the headlight housings in the locomotive. So now with basic disassembly complete, let's talk about the electronics a little bit in this locomotive. Now you'll note that the locomotive is equipped with a factory motherboard here, as well as a 9-pin JST connector which conforms to the NMRA specified wiring colors. You'll note that there is a dummy plug or a dummy board plugged into this harness. We'll remove that during the installation process, and this is how we'll attach our Econami ECO-200 decoder. You'll also note that this is a sound-ready model, and you'll see that there are two screws here holding the top of this weight cover in place Below this weight cover is a great place to mount our 35 by 16 millimeter speaker. Now, as we just told you, we're going to have to remove this 9-pin jumper board, this little dummy plug, from the harness in the Locomotive to install our decoder. So to do that, we're going to firmly grasp all 9 wires coming from the motherboard into the circuit, and with our other hand, we're also going to give a nice firm tug on this dummy board. And we'll remove this board and set it aside should we ever want to pull the decoder out of this Locomotive and put the DC operation back in the Locomotive. Now, to prep the speaker portion of the Locomotive, we have to remove the 2 Phillips head screws covering the speaker portion of the enclosure. To do so, we'll grab our Phillips head screwdriver, remove the front one here, and we'll loosen the rear one as well. And we'll grab the weight portion of the Locomotive, gently pulling up on it, giving our screws some help there. And we'll set this aside once we have it removed. Now, as a note, we have one more step because of the routing of the wires in this Locomotive. We actually have to remove the rear truck wires that are coming through on the top and bottom here of this particular board. So with these 2 screws loosened, let's pull off the black little clips that hold the wires to the circuit board here. To do that, you can use your tweezers and gently press on the outer 2-most portions of these clips. I'm going to move the Locomotive so we can see with the other camera here. We're going to gently press down on these, removing them, pushing them back just a little bit. And then we're going to actually pull the whole motherboard right off the top of the Locomotive like that. And you'll see that's actually pulled the 2 wires off of the Locomotive truck pickups here. So we'll set these to the left and right, and we'll remove the actual weight cover there. Now you'll see that we have a great space right here, milled from Athearn, and thanks to Athearn for that. And we have 4 screws that we can use to attach the actual 35 by 16 millimeter speaker. Now with that out of the way, let's talk about prepping the ECO-200 decoder for installation. So now the first and most obvious step in the installation is removing the decoder from the packaging. And just like we showed you on our Econami 2 21-pin NEM install video, we wanted to show you a couple little tidbits of information found on the Econami packaging as well. Now you'll notice that we've listed some of the most popular features and such on the actual front page here. And as we open up the inside of the packaging, you're going to find a wiring diagram, as well as a list of some of the most commonly adjusted CVs used in this decoder. Now if we flip it over to the back side there, you're also going to see a full list of the functions and function keys, the default function assignments as we call it, supported on this ECO-200 decoder. So we'll want to set this aside for safekeeping in the future. We want to make sure that we keep this so as we're programming the decoder we have a quick reference handy. So now that we've got the ECO-200 decoder out of the package, we want to show you some of the wiring and color-coded aspects of it that's going to help you in this installation. Now you're going to see, if we look, that we have 4 wires coming off of one side of the decoder. The 2 wires that are in my hands are both purple in color and will be soldered to the speaker. The additional 2 wires coming off of the other side of the decoder here are a green white stripe and a brown white stripe wire. These are for the FX5 and FX6 output found on the Econami 200 and the Econami 2200 series of 6-function decoders. We'll trim these back as we won't be using them in this installation. Now on the other side of the decoder here, you're going to see a 9-pin JST type harness on it. And this harness conforms to the NMRA color-coded wiring standard used in all locomotives. Now, we'll begin the process of installing the decoder by putting the decoder flat on our workbench there and picking up our X-Acto knife or our hobby knife and carefully trimming some of the heat shrink around the 9-pin side of the decoder here. Now to do that, we're going to very carefully trace the front side of the decoder here and run our knife right along the edge of the shrink here, gently removing gentle passes. We don't want one solid pass, removing some of the shrink wrap here. And once we have the first pass cut on the bottom side of the decoder, we'll flip the decoder over and we'll do the same on the top here as well. Now on the top you'll see that there's this 9-pin JST plug, this connector on the board. And we're going to remove this entire harness. So again, we're going to want to use this as a guide and trim right on top of the 9-pin plug. It's a little bit easier on this side of the model because you can put a little bit more pressure down on the decoder itself. So again, light passes right on the top of the heat shrink there. And this is where having a brand new X-Acto knife and X-Acto blade is very helpful. And you'll begin to see some of this heat shrink peeling away here. Now on the ends of the decoder, we have to be a little bit more careful. We want to make sure that we use this knife properly and cut away from us at all times. And we'll trim the ends of the heat wrap, the heat shrink, just as we did following the line on the 9-pin harness. So now that we've got the excess heat shrink wrap off the decoder, you can see that we have a very nice line across this side of the decoder, as well as on the top of the decoder, exposing the 9-pin JST harness. Now to remove this harness, all we have to do is grab the decoder firmly in one hand, and the 9-pin harness with all 9 wires in the other, and pull the JST harness from the decoder. Now it's going to be in there quite a bit, so you may have to pull a little bit more than you might think. And as long as you're grabbing all 9 wires, there's a very low risk of the actual harness being damaged in any way, shape, or form. So there we go, we removed the 9-pin harness. Now we can set this aside. This is great spare wire. It's also great if you want to do a different decoder installation with this decoder at some point that might require a hardwire type. So we'll set that aside. And once again, you'll see that we've exposed the 9-pin JST connector on the decoder. That'll plug right into this model. Now a couple more prep things to do. We're also going to want to trim back the brown-white and green-white wires found on the decoder, because we won't be using these wires for this particular installation. If you're using the FX5 and FX6 output for, say, ditch lights on the rear of the locomotive or any other lighting effects, you'd want to use these wires for that purpose. We're not using it in this installation, so we're going to grab our wire cutters and trim them back. And we'll cut them back to about 1.5 inches long here. And we'll set this wire aside too, should we need it for future installations. By doing so and cutting these back, we're able to tuck this underneath the decoder and tape everything together when we're done, keeping it a very nice, clean installation. Now, the actual process of installing the decoder itself is very easy. Since we've pulled the dummy board out of the model, you see we have this 9-pin JST connector, as we mentioned earlier. All we have to do is orient the decoder in such a way that all the other big components are facing up and plug the connector right into the same spot we removed the 9-wire harness from. Now you notice, as we mentioned earlier, these are the same connectors, same style, so you can simply unplug that harness and plug it right into this model. So now that we've got the decoder fastened to the 9-pin JST harness, you see we've added a piece of Kapton tape and placed the decoder in the model and mounted it to the actual circuit board itself. This will help keep the decoder in place throughout the rest of the installation. We've also tucked those green and white and brown and white strap wires underneath the decoder there to ensure that they're nice and out of the way during the reassembly process. With everything tucked in place on the decoder, we can grab our speaker, which is our 35 by 16 millimeter speaker, and install it in the factory supplied enclosure. Now, to do so, all we simply have to do is drop the speaker in place there and use 2 of the screws that we removed from the actual weight cover itself over this enclosure. Now, if you didn't have screw points, or if by some chance the thread pattern of the screws or the arrangement of the screws did not line up with our speaker, our 35 by 16 millimeter speaker, you can also use one of our 35 by 16 millimeter speaker gaskets mounted inside the speaker enclosure of the locomotive itself and simply press fit the speaker. This is a double-sided adhesive-backed gasket, meaning that there is adhesive on both sides, one side to stick to the actual frame of the locomotive and the other side to stick to the speaker. And this can be used to mount the gasket very easily. Since we know we have 2 good screw patterns here, we can use the 2 screws that we took out of the weight, as we mentioned earlier, and we'll grab our Phillips head screwdriver and simply place them right back into the model. So now to solder the speaker wires from our Econami ECO-200 decoder to the actual speaker itself, the first step would be to trim them to length. To do that, we'll use our wire strippers here, and we're going to use just a rough measurement, somewhere pulled right over the speaker there, and we'll make our cut. We'll set these 2 pieces of purple wire aside too. Those are great for other future installations as well. Now you notice that the actual speaker soldering points are mounted toward the front of the locomotive here, and that just prevents you from having to run any longer wires across the speaker. Keeps everything nice and neat. Now with one of those wires in hand here, we'll grab the pair of wire strippers, and we're going to strip back about 1/16 of an inch, like so, exposing the bare copper on that one, and we'll do the same with the second wire here. And now that we have those stripped, we want to apply a little bit of flux to tin the ends and aid in the soldering process. Now we're using, again, this no clean flux. This is not a plumber's flux. Do not use a plumber's flux on any of our products, as it could cause damage to the electronics components as well. So this is a no clean, or you could also use a rosin core based flux, but please do not use plumber's flux. Trust us, we don't want to see the decoders back, and you don't want to have to take it all apart to reinstall it. So with a little bit of flux applied to the end of the wires here, we'll grab our soldering iron, nice and hot, a little bit of solder right on the end of the iron here. And we should also mention that you want to clean the tip first. We just did that a couple seconds ago. So with a little bit of excess soldering right on the end of here, right on the end of the iron here, we'll apply it to the end of the wires. And you'll see a little bit of the insulation peel back. That's okay. All we're trying to do now is get a little bit of solder on there to help tin the wires. So with the tips tinned, we'll grab our wire strippers again here and cut the insulation back again, revealing only about a 1/16 of an inch of the exposed wire. We don't want to reveal too much of this wire. We don't want to have too much bare wire showing. What can happen as we apply more heat to it when we solder it to the speaker is that the insulation will pull back a little bit more, exposing some of the bare wires. We never want to have these two wires come in contact with the frame, the track wires, or each other. That could cause problems. That could short the decoder out and damage the audio circuit on it. So with those two wires cut back and stripped, we'll apply a little bit more flux to the actual speaker terminals themselves. Now we should note that these speaker terminals are what we call pre-tinned. They have solder on them from the factory, aiding you in the process. We won't need to add any more solder to this particular portion of the installation. So we'll take one wire, hold it in place with our tweezers over the terminal here, apply a little bit of heat, holding it in place, and we see we have a nice tight bond. And we'll do the same to the other wire here in a couple minutes. Now note that speaker polarity does not matter in a single speaker installation like this. It doesn't matter which wire you hook up to either side of the speaker. Now as you can see, we soldered another speaker wire to the speaker there, and we did that in the interest of time off camera. You'll see too that the speakers themselves, the speaker wires, are nice and short. There's no bare metal, no bare copper being exposed here, hanging off the back. And there's no way that these wires could short out against the frame, the truck pickups, or the track wires, or any other portion of the locomotive. Now if you remember early on, we actually removed the rear truck pickups, both left and right, to gain access to the actual weight portion on the top of the enclosure. So in order to put those back in place, we've got to again remove the circuit board off the top of the motor. And we can do a couple different things at this point. We can pull this black plastic clip off again and reaffix the wires if we'd like. And to do that, we can use our tweezers and gently push it off like that, sliding the wire in from the bottom through the little hole there in the circuit board. And now note that as you put this back in place, we want to make sure that the open or the exposed portion of the tab is actually facing downwards, just like the rest of them. And this is a good little way to reattach the wires and keep it as a factory unit. So by some chance this locomotive is under warranty, you can then ship this back to Athearn or whomever you're using. Walthers uses a very similar plug and design, and they would still be able to cover it. So we'll go ahead and put that back in place and put the cover in now. Now as one side note too, you saw that when we installed this decoder, we didn't have to add any resistors or voltage regulators for the lighting. This locomotive is equipped with 1.5 volt bulbs, both in the front headlight here and the rear headlight portion as well. And the circuitry on the factory installed motherboard will regulate that current and that voltage for you. So we can put it all back together now and give it a test run. So now that we've completed the installation and reassembly process involved with this Athearn RTR locomotive and our ECO-200 decoder, let's plug in our NCD power cap and test the locomotive. Now, the default address on all decoders is 3, an address of 3. You should see that come up on the throttle and you should hear the locomotive come to life. And there we go, we've got a prime mover sound. Now we can do a couple tests initially. We can test the bell by pressing function 1. There we go. Test the horn, the long horn first by pressing function 2. And turning it off. And lastly, the short horn, function 3. Now we want to test motor control here as well to make sure that we have the motor wired correctly. So with the throttle in the forward direction, we'll increase the speed step 1, and the locomotive moves forward. You'll also hear the prime mover RPM increase. We'll shut the locomotive, turn the locomotive off there. We'll go to back reverse, select the reverse direction, speed step 1, and the locomotive moves in reverse. Same thing, the engine RPMs increase. So we'll decrease that back, stop the locomotive. And now that we've tested the install, we want to do one more thing. We want to actually mute the decoder by pressing F8 to turn the sound off. And we want to test the locomotive both in the forward and reverse direction to listen for any sort of grinding noises or any sort of indications that a wire may be trapped within the flywheel or any other mechanism on the locomotive. So we'll go in reverse first. Doesn't sound like we have anything caught there. And back in the forward direction. Relatively quiet, great for an Athearn RTR series locomotive. So now a couple other things to talk about in basic programming. You notice that the prime mover that you hear running in the background right now is actually an EMD 567 prime mover. Now, we have to change that to the correct prime mover, an EMD 645 turbo prime mover, and you'll note that the Econami has up to 5 prime mover selections on it and 16 airhorns to choose from as well. So we're going to refer to our packaging that we set aside earlier for safekeeping. And we're going to look at CV number 123. CV123 is used to change the prime mover selection found on the decoder. If we look there, we'll see that the EMD 645 turbo prime mover is the second option, or an option value of 1. Programming CV123 to a value of 1 selects the EMD 645 turbo. So we'll set the packaging aside, and we'll program on the main track CV number 123 to a value of 1. And when I hit enter, you should hear the prime mover change. There we go. We've got an EMD 645 turbo running in the background now, which is appropriate for this EMD SD45 series locomotive. Now, from the factory we have a K5, an Athearn K5LA selected. Very nice and bright. Let's say we wanted to change that. We wanted to try one of the other 16 horns, or 15 horns, excuse me, on the decoder, total of 16. Let's try an Athearn P5. And that would be a value of 3. It's the fourth option on the decoder, but a value of 3 in CV120, used to select the air horn. So we'll program on the main again, CV number 120, and we'll enter a value of 3. And we'll blow the whistle, the air horn, and you can hear the change. So now that we've shown you just how easy it is to install our ECO-200 series decoder in this Athearn SD45 locomotive, we can apply a lot of these same concepts to any other locomotive equipped with a 9-pin JST DCC ready plug. Manufacturers such as Athearn and Walthurst use this plug quite a bit throughout their product line. We should also note too that if you wanted to upgrade this locomotive to a Tsunami 2 type decoder, you could use the Tsunami TSU 2200 for EMD diesels for this locomotive as well. The hardware is very similar, and it includes a 9-pin JST connection, just like we saw on this ECO-200 decoder. Now, for more information about the Econami product line and the rest of the SoundTraxx product line, please visit our website at www.soundtraxx.com and follow us on Facebook and YouTube for more great videos coming up in the future. Thanks for watching another edition of On Board with SoundTraxx, and we hope to see you again soon.